This is Los Angeles SOS, that is Los Angeles Strategies or Solutions. This is a program from the Institute for Public Strategy's West Hollywood Project. I'm Cynthia Nickerson. So glad that you joined us. Today, we're talking about the unfortunate rise in meth usage, addiction, overdoses, really everywhere, but specifically in West Hollywood. And joining me now is someone who has been moved by this, moved to the extent where he's really trying to take some action. This is Justin Brennan. Thank you so much for joining me, Justin.
Thank you, Cynthia. Great to be here.
All right. Well, let's first start with, generally speaking, what are you hearing and what are your impressions now about meth in West Hollywood?
I know this pretty well as being a resident of West Hollywood and more recently Los Angeles. I'm also on the gay dating apps like Grindr. So my experience is probably very much like a lot of residents' experience, where we're seeing a lot of activity on the apps, but even more so a lot of loss and struggling in our own friend groups and our relationships. And it just seems to be getting worse and worse, and yet there seems to be less conversation about the issue.
Has it risen during the pandemic or since the pandemic?
Data is always delayed. We can make a lot of assumptions that people who are isolated in their homes, by themselves during a stressful year are likely relying on substances to get through. But no data has been released yet. But all signs to previous data would show that the increases are continuing, yes.
Okay. All right. So in terms of exposure to meth, what are you finding? Where are people getting it? You mentioned the dating app. Explain that.
Yeah. So Grindr is the #1 gay dating app. A lot of people use it, to make friendships or to form relationships or one-night stands. Some people use it, for their livelihood, whether it's, massages or physical therapy, personal training, stuff like that. And so, excuse me, I've been on the app for many years. Grindr's been around, I think, 11 years. Meth has always been present on the app. I would say within the last 5 to 6 years, it's become a much heavier presence, a much more aggressive tone. And then oddly, even with new ownership at Grindr, there doesn't seem to be any sort of tighter guardrails or boundaries being formed to combat the prevalence of this topic.
Justin, you mentioned that it's seemed to be getting more aggressive tone. Explain that a little bit, going back to when you first started on the app till now, the evolution of the discussion about meth.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in the field. I've done my own research and had my own life experiences with it. But what I've noticed within the last few years is just more blatant broadcasting of, selling or buying meth or wanting to do meth. And then kind of like a straight to it approach where we used to say hi, we used to say, how are you? And a lot of times it's straight to, hey, do you party? Hey, do you want to do meth? Do you party and play? And I used to block those. I used to kind of just ignore those people. But in trying to understand this more and understand the appeal, I started writing back to them and just saying, no, man, meth sucks. And they'd write back, you're right, it does. And they'd open up about their addiction. And, this was the first time that I personally was looking at this with more empathy and coming at it with more compassion. And in doing so, I came to realize, look, these are human beings. These are our peers. They're not to be abandoned or shunned. They shouldn't be shamed. There should be no stigmas here. We should be able to talk about chemsex culture openly, and then, talk more specifically about finding innovative solutions that can help reduce hospitalizations and overdoses.
It's interesting about the app, apparent lack of oversight, seeing that there's so much attention now on social media, Facebook and Twitter, about policing speech and different types of conversations. So what have you noticed, or what kind of feedback, if any, have you gotten from Grindr?
Yeah, so this coalition I started to get it together began last year when I lost a friend to meth, and trying to understand it more. I could see Grindr's role in enabling the behavior and, not doing as much as possible to combat it or even just to discuss it. You look on Grindr's online resources, their holistic security guides, their help messaging and stuff. There's no mention of chemsex. There's no mention of methamphetamine. There's no mention of party and play and And this feels like a real opportunity for the new owners of Grindr to be leaders in this space and be pioneers. While they admit they are outside of the LGBTQ plus community, they still see Grindr's role in the protection and safety of that community. And so we've not directly reached out to Grindr because our strategy is much more focused on getting community involvement, getting buy-in from the city of West Hollywood. And we have asked the city of West Hollywood to make the formal request to have an open and ongoing dialogue with Grindr, not only between the city and Grindr, which is headquartered in West Hollywood, but also between Grindr and community organizations that have been greatly impacted by this app. Like I said, it's over 10 years old, and there are so many different segments of our community that have been impacted in different ways. And we feel it's more than time that we have a chance to speak directly to people who can help influence and make decisions that can improve the situation. What we're asking for is a louder conversation, more publicly, and specifically with all parties that are involved. And that includes corporations like Grindr. They are a very successful app. They generate close to $100 million in revenue annually, close to half of that being around maybe 40 million in profit. I don't know that there's any other corporation that makes that much money solely from the pockets of the LGBTQ community. And so the questions that need to be asked are, what level of responsibility does a corporation have? And how much should they give back to a community that gives so much to them? And then there's an added layer of complexity because Grindr was just bought by two straight white men last June in 2020. And while they are not members of the community, they, actively support the community, and they obviously want a healthy, safe community. And so it's an opportunity to have a greater discussion about the expectations we have of our CEOs and of our corporations, especially in a community like ours.
And especially because people lose their life with meth overdose. So this is an important topic, and so glad that you're working on it. And we hope to continue a relationship with you to, get this addressed. So appreciate your time, Justin. Anything else you want to add before we?
Well, and just sure, and just doing some more homework and speaking to chemsex counselors and therapists and more or less experts in this field, we are finding really startling realizations, such as people in recovery on meth who still want a social life, who are still on the app and trying to, avoid being triggered. In speaking with one chemsex counselor, they've said when their clients are relapsing, it's happening on the apps 100% of the time. So when you ask questions about what is the role, what is the responsibility of an app, and how should they, respond, we all know Grindr wasn't invented for this reason of buying and selling and doing meth. We get that, right? But it is how the community is using it. And so there should be a conversation about accountability and what new solutions could be brought forward that could help, reduce this problem. Thank you for, giving us an opportunity to have this conversation and to speak so openly about it. I appreciate your attention to the subject and all the work that IPS has been doing in this space for so long.
Absolutely. And this will not be our last conversation. Definitely not. So.
Definitely.
All right, Justin, thank you so much, and you have a great day. Thank you for watching LA-SOS, LA Strategies or Solutions, a program of the West Hollywood Project. For more information, visit our social media pages.